I stood at the airport as my husband left with his sister. "We're taking my sister instead. She's my girlfriend now," he smirked. While they flew to St. Bart's, I quietly rebooked their trip to a Siberian wasteland. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. The morning started with hope. It was 5 a.m., and the sky outside our bedroom window was a soft, pre-dawn gray. I'd been awake for an hour, too jittery with excitement to sleep. Today was the day. The day of the big surprise. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Preston. Downstairs in our large, silent kitchen, I got to work. I put on a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. I pulled out the expensive dinnerware Eleanor had given us for our wedding, the china she'd said was for special occasions only, with a pointed look that implied I might otherwise use it for Tuesday night tuna casserole. Today was a special occasion. I was making Preston's favorite breakfast, eggs Benedict with smoked salmon and fresh dill, and a side of Belgian waffles with strawberries arranged in the shape of a heart. It was the breakfast his mother said he adored as a child, a detail I'd logged away like so many others. I'd even chosen my outfit with meticulous care, a blue sundress Preston had once, years ago on our honeymoon, said brought out the color of my eyes. My hair was freshly highlighted, my nails were done in a subtle French manicure. I was playing a part, the perfect wife, about to give her husband the perfect surprise to recapture a perfect love we'd lost. I was so full of hope, it felt like a tangible thing, warm and buzzing under my skin. The doorbell rang at precisely 7:30 a.m., just as I was putting the finishing touches on the waffles. I smoothed my dress, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror, and pulled the door open with a beaming smile. It was Eleanor. Wrapped in a camel hair coat despite the June heat, her Louis Vuitton luggage stacked neatly beside her like a monument to her own importance. "Audrey," she said, air-kissing my cheek while her eyes scanned my appearance with cool appraisal. "Connor said you'd be ready by now. The car service is waiting." I blinked, my smile faltering. "Car service? I thought we were driving to the airport." Eleanor sighed, the familiar sound of disappointment I'd grown to dread. "Preston arranged everything. Didn't he tell you? Typical man, never communicates the details." She brushed past me into the house. "Is that breakfast? We don't have time. The flight's at 10 o'clock. My stomach dropped. "But, our flight isn't until 1. Our flight. The ticket's in my name and Preston's. The confirmation emails only I had seen. Preston appeared at the top of the stairs then, wheeling a large, graphite-colored suitcase. Not the blue one I'd helped him pack the night before. "Morning," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "You ready? Mom's driver is outside." That's when the words finally came out, thick and clumsy in my mouth. "We're taking my new girlfriend instead. She needs a break from her dead-end job." No, wait. That's not what he said. He didn't say it yet. That came later. First was the confusion. I asked him, "Where's the blue Samsonite?" My voice was hollow. He shrugged, a gesture of casual dismissal. "This one's bigger. More suitable for a long trip." A long trip. The exact length of the Maldives vacation I'd planned. 2 weeks of paradise I'd been imagining for 18 months. It was Eleanor who delivered the next line. "Let's go," she said, checking her watch impatiently. "We're meeting her at the terminal." Her. Not it. Her. And still, I followed them. Like a lamb. I grabbed my own hastily packed carry-on and followed them out to the waiting black SUV, my own carefully packed suitcase left behind in the foyer next to the wilting waffles. I slid into the cold leather seats, still believing, desperately wanting to believe, that this was all some grand, elaborate misunderstanding. We were halfway to JFK, the familiar landmarks of Queens blurring past the tinted windows, when Preston finally said the words. He didn't even turn around. He just spoke to my reflection in the rearview mirror, his voice casual, dismissive, final. We're taking my sister instead. She's my girlfriend now. The words just hung there in the air, thick and suffocating like poison gas. I stared at the back of his head, at his perfectly tailored suit jacket, absolutely certain I'd misheard him. The polished leather of the car service suddenly felt cold and slick against my skin. Outside, the airport loomed ahead. It was supposed to be a beacon of escape. A vacation that, apparently, no longer included me and had been replaced by a horror I couldn't even begin to comprehend. You can't be serious, I whispered. My voice was so thin, it was barely a sound over the low hum of the engine. But the look on his face in the mirror said everything. That lazy, half-smirk I once found so charming now twisted into something cruel. In the passenger seat, Eleanor just adjusted her enormous sunglasses. Audrey, dear, she said, her voice dripping with pity. Surely you saw this coming. As I stood on that curb, watching them drive away, the past 8 years of my life didn't flash before my eyes, they solidified. It was like a blurry photograph finally coming into sharp, painful focus. The signs had always been there, hadn't they? They were like whispers in a house I desperately wanted to believe wasn't haunted. Preston and Meredith. Their bond was always different. Eleanor called it a profound sterling connection, something mere mortals like me couldn't possibly understand. I remember our first Christmas as a married couple. It was a grand affair at the Sterling estate, a place so formal and quiet you felt like you had to whisper. I had spent a month knitting a beautiful cashmere scarf for Meredith, choosing the yarn myself, wanting her to like me. She opened it, gave a thin smile, and said, "Oh. How rustic." She set it aside. A few minutes later, Preston handed her a small, velvet box. Inside was a pair of diamond stud earrings. Simple, elegant, and incredibly expensive. She'd thrown her arms around his neck, her face buried in his shoulder, and he'd held her just a little too long, a little too tight. He'd looked over her shoulder and met my eyes, and his expression wasn't happy. It was defiant. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was being sensitive. Then there were the work nights. Preston was a partner at a major law firm, and he often worked late from his home office. Meredith, who despite a fancy degree seemed to have no actual career, would often come over to help him organize case files. Our study had these heavy, soundproofed oak doors. They were always closed when she was there. One night, I made a pot of tea and brought it to them. I found the door was locked. I knocked softly. "Just a minute," Preston called out, his voice strained. I waited. It was a long minute. I could hear shuffling, a muffled whisper. When he finally opened the door, his tie was loosened and his face was flushed. Meredith was sitting on the far side of the room, on the deep leather sofa, quickly smoothing her skirt. The air was thick with a cloying, sweet perfume, her perfume. "Sorry, honey," Preston had said, blocking the doorway. Just in the middle of a really intense deposition prep. Super confidential. I remember just nodding, holding the tray. "Oh. Okay. I'll just leave this out here for you." I felt like a servant in my own home. I walked away, the tea growing cold on the tray, and I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was plain to see. The excuses were endless. He cancelled our anniversary dinner because Meredith had a sudden crisis with a landlord. He missed my 30th birthday party because Meredith had a cold and needed him to bring her soup. Every major event, every small moment that should have been ours, was intruded upon by her phantom needs and his unwavering devotion to them. I did try to talk to him about it, more than once. The conversations always ended the same way. We'd be in our large, cold bed, separated by a foot of empty space. "Preston," I'd start, my voice small in the darkness. I feel like I'm not your priority. He would sigh, a sound of pure exasperation. Audrey, please don't start. Meredith is my sister. She's fragile. The world is a tough place for someone like her. And what about me? I'd ask. Am I not your wife? Of course you are, he'd say, his voice patronizing. And my wife shouldn't be so insecure. It's not an attractive quality. Insecure. Fragile. Hysterical. These were the words they used to build a cage around me. They made me believe I was the problem. The whispers in that house weren't just between them, they were in my own head, planted by them, telling me I was crazy for seeing what was right in front of me. Standing there at the airport, the noise in my head finally went silent. I wasn't crazy. I had just been living in a madhouse. If the betrayal from my husband and his family was a knife in the back, the betrayal from my own parents was the twist. They didn't just fail to protect me, they actively pushed me into the fire and then acted surprised when I got burned. They were accomplices, driven by a desperate, pathetic desire for proximity to the sterling wealth and status. I remember the day I got engaged. Preston had proposed at a stuffy gala for his law firm, a grand public gesture that was more about his image than about us. When we went to my parents' house the next day to celebrate, I had a moment alone with my father in his study. I showed him the ring. It was enormous, far too flashy for my taste, but I knew better than to say so. My dad, a man who ran a moderately successful construction supply company, held my hand and looked at the diamond, not at me. You landed a big one, Audrey, he said, his voice thick with a kind of awe. A sterling. Do you know what this means for us? For the business? He squeezed my hand tightly. Your only job now is to keep him happy. No matter what. Don't mess this up. Don't mess this up. He wasn't talking to his daughter. He was talking to his investment. But the most painful memory, the one that played over and over in my mind as I stood paralyzed on that sidewalk, was a phone call with my mother from about a year ago. It was after the business trip Preston took to Aspen with Meredith. Just the two of them. He'd said she was acting as his paralegal assistant for a deposition. I was a wreck. I knew, on some gut level, that something was deeply wrong. I found a receipt in his coat pocket, not for a deposition service, but for a couple's massage at the resort spa. I called my mom, my voice shaking so badly I could barely speak. Mom, I can't do this anymore. It's not normal. He took her to Aspen, and they got a couple's massage together. A couple's massage. I waited for the explosion, for the maternal rage that would validate my own. Instead, there was a long, drawn-out sigh. Audrey, honestly. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. It was probably a spa package that came with the room. You can't be so provincial. Provincial? Mom, he's my husband. And he's her brother, she snapped. You are letting your imagination run wild. You need to stop this before you push him away. Do you have any idea how important the Sterling family's annual charity gala is to your father's business? He gets half his contracts for the year from the people he meets there. You are part of that family now. You need to think about the bigger picture, not just your own petty feelings. Petty feelings. The foundation of my marriage cracking apart was reduced to petty feelings. Then came the final nail in the coffin of my denial. I remembered it with horrifying clarity. A few months ago, both families were having brunch. I was supposed to be there, but I had a terrible migraine. I felt a bit better later and decided to show up to surprise them. As I neared the patio, I heard my mother's voice, low and conspiratorial. It's the best solution for the long term. The bloodline remains pure. And the inheritance is kept entirely within the family. Preston and Meredith understand their duty. Eleanor had replied, her voice like smooth, cold silk. Exactly. And Audrey is manageable. She knows her place. As long as she remains discreet, the arrangement works for everyone. The arrangement. My life. My love. My marriage. It was all a business deal. A strategic plan to keep the sterling bloodline and fortune pure. I wasn't a wife, I was a beard. A respectable, manageable cover story. And my own parents had knowingly, willingly, sold me into that role. For what? For a better table at the country club? For a few extra construction contracts? I had turned and fled that day, my head pounding, telling myself I'd misunderstood, that I was twisting their words. But now, the truth was undeniable. They had all betrayed me. Every single one of them. The pain was so immense, so absolute, it became something else. It became fuel. It became a cold, clear, liberating rage. They thought I was manageable. They were about to find out just how badly they had mismanaged me. 18 months. Over 500 days of secret saving, of late nights, of quiet sacrifices. It all began on our 6th anniversary. Preston had forgotten. It wasn't a malicious forgetting, it was worse. It was an indifferent one. He'd come home from the office around 10 p.m., found me at the dining room table with a candle flickering between 2 plates of perfectly cooked, now cold steak, and he just stared. There wasn't even a flash of guilt in his eyes. Just confusion. "What's all this?" he'd asked, loosening his tie. "It's our anniversary, Preston," I'd said, my voice flat. "Oh. Right. Is that tonight?" He picked up a piece of asparagus from his plate, eaten it cold, and said, "Sorry, long day. I'm beat." Then he'd gone upstairs. I sat there for another hour in the dark, watching the candle burn down. I knew then that our marriage was a hollow shell. But I wasn't ready to admit it. I thought one grand gesture, one magnificent, undeniable act of love could fix it. I thought I could force the magic back. The next day, I opened a secret savings account. I called it Maldives. It became my quiet obsession, my second life. The marketing job Preston had encouraged me to take, less stress, more time for us, he'd said, had a modest salary. It wasn't enough. So, I started freelancing again, quietly, after he went to bed. I built websites for small businesses. I wrote copy for catalogs. I took on any project I could find, powered by caffeine and a desperate hope. My eyes were always gritty with exhaustion. I remember one specific project. It was for a demanding client, a small law firm that needed a complete website overhaul in 2 weeks. For 14 straight nights, I worked until 3 a.m. On the final night, as I was uploading the finished site, my laptop screen glowing in the dark room, I looked over at Preston. He was fast asleep, not a care in the world. And I felt a surge of something. Pride, maybe. I was doing this. For us. The next morning, the payment came through, and every single dollar went straight into the Maldives account. I remember watching the balance tick up and feeling a thrill of secret power. I sold my grandmother's jewelry, a string of pearls, a delicate gold locket. I told myself she would have wanted me to fight for my marriage. I drove my beat-up 10-year-old Honda, even though we could easily have afforded a new car, because a car payment would have cut into my savings plan. I finally walked into the travel agency on a rainy Tuesday in April. I felt like an imposter. I was wearing jeans and an old sweater, and I was about to book a trip that cost more than my car. The agent, Veronica, was all polished professionalism, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes as I described the overwater bungalow, the private butler, the works. "That is our premium package, ma'am," she'd said, her voice smooth. The price she quoted stole the air from my lungs. It would mean maxing out my credit card and spending years paying it off. My hand was trembling as I pushed my card across the polished wooden desk. "It's an investment," I heard myself say, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "An investment in our marriage." Looking back, I see the foolishness of it all. I was investing in a fraudulent company, pouring my life's energy into a lie. But all that hope, all that sacrifice, it hadn't just vanished on that airport curb. It had transformed. It had hardened from a desperate, fragile hope into something solid and sharp. It had become the weapon I never knew I needed. The polished black interior of the SUV felt like a coffin. The silence after Preston's monstrous declaration, "She's my girlfriend now," was so absolute, I could hear the frantic pounding of my own heart. I felt detached, like I was floating above my own body, watching a scene from some terrible, twisted movie. Eleanor was the one who finally broke the silence. She turned around in her seat, a maneuver of practiced elegance, and removed her oversized sunglasses. Her eyes, a pale, cold blue so like her son's, held no malice. They held something worse, complete and utter indifference. "Audrey," she began, her tone patient, as if explaining a complex financial matter to a simple-minded intern. "You need to understand. This isn't some sordid, common affair. This is about legacy. It's about the continuation of the Sterling family in its purest form. Some things are simply more important than conventional sentimentality." The words were so absurd, so profoundly arrogant, that for a moment, I couldn't even form a response. I just stared at her perfectly coiffed hair, her diamond earrings, the string of pearls at her throat. "More important?" I finally whispered, the words catching in my throat. "More important than vows? Than decency? Than basic human morality?" Preston sighed from the driver's seat, a sound of pure, put-upon exasperation. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his handsome face marred by a look of annoyance. I was ruining the mood. "Don't be so dramatic, Audrey," he said. "It's about the bloodline. Purity. Strength. Our family didn't get to where it is by being sentimental. The family's assets, the trusts, the inheritance, it's a complex structure. Keeping it all within the direct family line is the most logical, efficient solution. Meredith understands that. She's a Sterling. She gets the bigger picture." I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the armrest to steady myself. They were talking about their family like it was a corporation, and about their relationship like it was a merger. So what was I? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. What were the last 8 years of my life? Was I just a business expense? "Don't be crude, dear," Eleanor chided gently. "You were a necessary social arrangement. A wonderful one. You played your part beautifully. You presented a respectable, normal front to the world while we waited for the right time. We are, in our own way, very grateful for your service." Grateful for your service. The words of a dismissal. I wasn't a wife. I was a contractor whose term had just expired. And now? I managed. What happens now? "Now, it's time for the next phase," Preston said, his voice taking on a brighter, more enthusiastic tone as he turned onto the airport access road. The ordeal was almost over for him. "Meredith and I are going to start a family. A proper family. The board of directors at the firm are partners, they value stability, family. This trip to St. Bart's is a celebration of our new beginning." Street Bart's? The name cut through my haze of horror. But I booked the Maldives. Eleanor actually laughed. A short, sharp, ugly bark of a sound. "Oh, you poor, quaint thing. The Maldives? That's for honeymooners and tourists. We're going to St. Bart's. The firm has a connection at a private resort there. It's much more appropriate for someone of Preston's position. And much more exclusive. Of course. Even their betrayal had to be exclusive. They weren't just ending our marriage. They were upgrading it. They were telling me, in every possible way, that I had never been good enough, that the life I thought we had was just a cheap imitation of the real thing they had planned all along. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. It turned to ice and dust. The woman they thought they knew, the manageable, quiet Audrey, was gone. And in her place was a stranger, a woman with nothing left to lose and a terrible, newfound clarity. As the SUV pulled away, leaving me in its exhaust-fumed wake, the world seemed to go into slow motion. I saw a family hugging, a young couple kissing, a businessman barking into his phone. Life, in all its mundane glory, was continuing all around me, utterly indifferent to the fact that mine had just been detonated. The sobs I expected, the frantic, screaming rage, none of it came. Instead, a strange and profound calm settled over me. It was the kind of calm that comes after a devastating storm, when the wind dies down and all you can see is the wreckage. The shock had burned away everything extraneous: grief, self-pity, love. All that was left was the cold, hard, unvarnished truth. And in that sterile emptiness, an old version of myself began to stir. Before I was Audrey Sterling, the quiet wife who hosted perfect dinner parties, I was Audrey Miller, Senior Project Manager for Global Strategy Events. My colleagues didn't call me Audrey, they called me the architect. I was the one they brought in when a project was on fire, when a client was screaming, when a plan had gone catastrophically wrong. I didn't just fix problems, I rebuilt them from the ground up, often better than they were before. I'll never forget the Shanghai Scramble. We were launching a new luxury vehicle in China. 2 days before the event, with 300 international journalists already in the air, a sudden government crackdown on lavish corporate events was announced. Our venue was cancelled. Our permits were revoked. My boss was having a panic attack. I sent him to the hotel bar, locked myself in a conference room with 6 phones and a pot of black coffee, and for 36 straight hours, I didn't sleep. I called in favors, I negotiated with baffled government functionaries, I rerouted catering trucks, and I redesigned the entire event. We ended up hosting it on a series of interconnected, custom-built barges on the Huangpu River. It was a logistical nightmare, but it was spectacular. The press called it the most innovative launch of the decade. Preston had called it cute that I was so passionate about my little party planning job. He and Eleanor had gently, persistently, encouraged me to take a less demanding role at a local firm. "You need to reduce your stress, darling," Eleanor had said. "A man like Preston needs a calm, serene home to return to." The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. They thought they had neutered me, turned me into a placid housewife. They had no idea that the architect was still in there, dormant, waiting for a project. I picked up my suitcase, the handle cold and solid in my grip. I walked, not to the taxi stand, but straight through the sliding glass doors of Terminal 4. The cool, recycled air felt like a splash of cold water to the face. I bypassed the check-in counters and found a quiet, secluded Starbucks near the international gates. I ordered a large black coffee, found a worn armchair in the corner, and opened my laptop. My fingers, which had been trembling just minutes before, were now perfectly steady. I pulled up the file for the Maldives trip. The confirmation. The payment details. The contact information for Veronica at the travel agency. I took a deep, steadying breath. This was just another project on fire. The objective was no longer to build a romantic getaway. The new objective was to build a prison. I pulled out my phone and dialed Veronica's direct line. "Good morning, Veronica," I said. My voice was crisp, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was a voice Preston had never heard. "This is Audrey Sterling, calling about the Sterling party. We need to activate Plan B." There was a short pause, the clicking of a keyboard. "Of course, Miss Sterling," Veronica's voice came back, smooth as ever. "Let me just pull up your file." "Ah, yes. The contingency arrangements we discussed yesterday. You're absolutely certain you want to proceed?" "Yesterday. The day I'd seen the text from Meredith on Preston's phone. Can't wait for St. Bart's, my love." Is our little problem handled? My heart had shattered then. But in the hours that followed, the pieces had reformed themselves into something sharp and cold. I had called Veronica and, with ice in my veins, set up this very contingency. Completely certain, Veronica, I said, looking out at a 747 taxiing on the runway. The clients have had a last-minute change of heart. They've specifically requested the authentic wilderness experience we discussed. They've signed all the necessary waivers. It was true. Preston had signed the revised itinerary I'd put in front of him last week along with a stack of other household papers. Just sign here, honey, I'd said. He hadn't even glanced at it. He trusted me to handle the little details. Very good, Veronica said. I've confirmed their accommodations at the Dixon Wilderness Retreat. It's quite remote, as you requested. Remote was an understatement. I had found it on a blog for extreme adventure travelers. Dixon, Siberia. A former Soviet-era outpost, now one of the most isolated human settlements in the world. The eco-retreat I'd booked was a converted meteorological station. And its main selling point, according to the blog? Its stunning, panoramic views of the region's largest industrial landfill. The architect was back at her drafting table. And she was about to design a masterpiece. In that airport Starbucks, surrounded by the mundane chaos of travel, I became a phantom artist, painting a masterpiece of misery on a canvas half a world away. This wasn't a messy, emotional outburst. This was a meticulously planned, flawlessly executed project. Perfect, I told Veronica, my voice a calm counterpoint to the hiss of the espresso machine behind me. And their special requests? All the custom amenities we discussed? Yes, ma'am, she confirmed, her tone never wavering. A true professional. We've confirmed the full digital detox package. No cell service is available at the facility, and internet access is limited to 1 hour per day, from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. local time, in the main hall only. I pictured Eleanor, a woman who checked her social media every 7 minutes, twitching with withdrawal. The wilderness guides have been instructed that the clients prefer an immersive experience and speak minimal English, Veronica continued. And the accommodations have been paid in full. As you know, this is a non-refundable, non-transferable booking. Music to my ears. And the special welcome package? I asked, a small smile playing on my lips. The curated selection of local delicacies and the traditional regional attire will be waiting in their rooms upon arrival, she said. I must say, Miss Sterling, your clients have very specific tastes. I had done my research. The local delicacies included stroganina, a dish of raw, frozen fish shaved into paper-thin slices, and colladettes, a jellied meat dish that looked like something from a science experiment. The traditional attire was a collection of oversized, scratchy wool garments and felted boots, standard issue for workers in the Soviet era. I was sure they would clash wonderfully with Meredith's white linen resort wear. My clients are true adventurers, I said sweetly. They crave authenticity above all else. After hanging up with Veronica, my work was only just beginning. First, I created the paper trail. I logged into a temporary email account I'd created and crafted a message that appeared to be from the guest relations manager at the 5-star Street Barts Resort. I filled it with effusive apologies about an unforeseen and deeply regrettable overbooking situation. As a gesture of their profound remorse, they were offering the Sterling party a complimentary upgrade, an exclusive, all-expenses-paid transfer to a partner property, the Siberian Aurora Wilderness Lodge, an invitation-only experience for their most valued clients. I made it sound like the opportunity of a lifetime. I attached the non-refundable terms and conditions Preston had already signed. I then scheduled that email to be forwarded to his corporate address, timed to arrive the moment they were scheduled to land in Moscow. Next, the logistics of the journey itself. Veronica had already handled the flight rerouting. A critical hydraulic failure would be discovered mid-flight over the Atlantic, forcing an emergency landing in Moscow. Once on the ground, a specially briefed airline representative would inform them that, due to the unscheduled landing, their connecting flight to the Caribbean was impossible. However, the airline, in cooperation with their travel agent, had already arranged a new, upgraded itinerary for them. Their only option would be the connecting flight to Dixon. Finally, the luggage. This was my favorite part. I made a call to an old contact, Mark, a freelance logistics coordinator who owed me a big favor after the Shanghai scramble. "Hey Mark, it's Audrey Miller," I said. "Audrey. Blast from the past. What can I do for you?" "I need a set of luggage to be temporarily misplaced," I explained. 3 passengers, flying into Dixon, Siberia. I need their bags to take a very scenic tour of the Russian Federation for about 72 hours before being delivered. Mark laughed. "Say no more. Consider it done." "Who'd you piss off this time?" "You don't want to know," I said, smiling. "Just send me the bill." I leaned back in the worn armchair, the now cold coffee forgotten. I felt a sense of calm, focused power I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't rage anymore. This was art. With the Siberian trap set and baited, it was time to burn down my old life. The revenge wasn't just about sending them to a frozen hell, it was about ensuring that when they returned, the woman they had wronged would be gone without a trace, and the life they had controlled would be ashes. Sitting right there in that Starbucks, I began my demolition. First, the money. I logged into our joint bank accounts. Preston had always handled the major finances, making me feel like a child with an allowance. He managed the large investment portfolio, funded primarily by his family's money and his huge salary. My own modest salary went into a joint checking account to cover what he called the household incidentals, groceries, gas, the dry cleaning. But there was one account he didn't pay much attention to, the emergency fund. For 8 years, I had secretly funneled every freelance check, every birthday gift from my grandmother, every dollar I could scrimp and save into that account. It was my rainy day fund. And right now, it was a tsunami. With a series of swift, emotionless clicks, I initiated a wire transfer. I took every single penny from the emergency fund. Then I took exactly 50% of the joint checking account. I left his investment portfolio untouched, my lawyer would deal with that. The money was moved into a new, private bank account I had opened the week before under my maiden name. It wasn't theft. It was a severance package. My severance package, for 8 years of dedicated, unappreciated service. Next, the law. I didn't waste time with a friendly family lawyer. I pulled up the website for the most feared divorce attorney in the state, a woman whose nickname was the Shark. I'd read an article about her once, about a high-profile case where she'd left a cheating CEO with nothing but his golf clubs. I called her office. Her assistant put me through immediately. Catherine Black speaking, a sharp, no-nonsense voice said. "My name is Audrey Sterling," I began, my voice clear and steady. "And I need to file for divorce immediately. My husband has engaged in a long-term, incestuous affair with his own sister." There was a beat of pure, unadulterated silence on the other end of the line. I think I may have actually shocked the Shark. "Well," she said finally, a note of what sounded like professional glee in her voice. "This is going to be a fascinating case. I'll have my paralegal email you the initial paperwork within the hour. We'll serve him the moment his plane touches back down on U.S. soil. Don't you worry, Ms. Sterling. We'll take good care of you." Finally, a home. I wasn't going back to that cold, beige house filled with ghosts and lies. I opened a real estate website and typed Denver, Colorado into the search bar. My sister lived there. It was thousands of miles away. It was perfect. I didn't look for houses. I looked for a small, simple, one-bedroom apartment with a great view. I found one on the 15th floor of a modern building downtown, with a balcony that looked out over the Rocky Mountains. I filled out the rental application online, used my newly liberated funds to pay the security deposit and first month's rent, and digitally signed the lease. Just as the confirmation email for my new apartment popped into my inbox, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Preston. A photo of him, Meredith, and Eleanor, all clinking champagne glasses in their first-class seats. The caption read, "Boarding now. Don't wait up." The arrogance of it was breathtaking. I took a screenshot for Catherine Black's files. Then I typed back one, simple, final message. "Enjoy your family trip. I hope it's everything you deserve." I hit send. Then I blocked his number. And Meredith's. And Eleanor's. I closed my laptop, my work complete. The entire process, dismantling my finances, hiring a shark, and leasing a new life in a new city, had taken less than 90 minutes. I stood up, left the empty coffee cup on the table, and walked out of the airport into the bright morning sun, leaving the ghost of Audrey Sterling behind forever. I had a flight of my own to catch. I didn't fly to Denver that day. I knew the first 24 hours of their journey would be the most satisfying to witness, even from a distance. I checked into a generic, anonymous hotel near the airport, a place with bland art on the walls and scratchy towels in the bathroom. It felt like a safe house, a neutral zone between my past and my future. I ordered a club sandwich from room service that I had no intention of eating and turned on the TV, letting the noise of a game show wash over me. On my laptop, I had a flight tracker open, watching their little plane icon make its slow, inexorable journey across the Atlantic. It was surreal. Right on schedule, as the icon passed the midpoint of its journey, it made an abrupt, 90-degree turn northward. My heart gave a little flutter. It was happening. A few minutes later, the flight status on the airline's website officially changed, diverted to Moscow Sheremetyevo International Airport due to a critical hydraulic system failure. A beautifully technical, terrifyingly believable lie. I took a sip of the ridiculously overpriced minibar wine and smiled. Phase 1 was complete. It took them another 8 hours to land in Moscow and deplane. I could only imagine the simmering fury. The indignant speeches to the flight crew, the demands to speak to a supervisor, the sheer, unadulterated rage of 3 people for whom the world had always bent to their will. The first message finally came through at 3:17 a.m. my time. It was from a Russian number, sent via a messaging app. Preston had obviously been forced to buy a local SIM card, a small indignity that I savored. "Audrey, what in the hell is going on? Our flight was diverted to Moscow. A mechanical failure. Now they're telling us our only connecting flight is to some godforsaken place called Dixon. I looked it up. It's in Siberia. This is your doing. You booked these tickets. Fix it. Now." I let the message sit there, unread, for a full 15 minutes. I wanted him to stew. I wanted him to imagine me sleeping peacefully, unaware of his predicament. Finally, I typed my reply, carefully crafting each word for maximum, infuriating calmness. "How unfortunate. That sounds very stressful. As I'm no longer your wife or your travel agent, I'm afraid I can't be of assistance. However, I have forwarded all the travel documentation, including the terms and conditions you signed, to your email. I'm sure it will clarify the airline's rerouting protocols. All changes are, as you agreed, non-refundable." The 3 little dots that indicate someone is typing appeared almost instantly. They appeared, disappeared, and reappeared for nearly 5 minutes. He was typing and deleting, his rage too immense to be contained in a single message. "This is not a joke. I am calling my father's contact at the State Department. My family has friends in the Russian government. You have no idea the trouble you are in. You will regret this for the rest of your pathetic life." I didn't bother replying to that one. Let him make his calls. The travel authorizations Veronica had secured were for a restricted access region. They were obscure, specific, and would tie any diplomat up in bureaucratic red tape for weeks. A short while later, a notification from Instagram confirmed the rising panic. Meredith had posted a story. It was a blurry, poorly lit photo of a bleak airport terminal with signs in Cyrillic. She had used a string of crying and angry face emojis. The caption read, "Worst trip ever. Stuck in some Russian hellhole. At Preston Sterling, you better fix this." The cracks in their perfect, united front were already beginning to show. I turned off my phone, finished my wine, and went to sleep. I slept for 10 solid hours, a deep, dreamless, and profoundly peaceful sleep. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the gap in the hotel curtains. I felt rested. I felt powerful. I checked my laptop. The little plane icon showed they had taken off from Moscow hours ago. Their next stop, their final destination, was Dixon. The real show was about to begin. I could almost feel the jolt of the landing gear hitting the cracked, icy tarmac of the Dixon airstrip. In my mind's eye, I watched the door of their small, propeller-driven plane open, not to a gust of warm, salt-scented air, but to a blast of wind so cold it felt like swallowing glass. A wind that carried the faint, sickly sweet smell of industrial waste from the landfill that squatted on the horizon like a sleeping, malevolent giant. I pictured the three of them descending the rickety metal stairs, their expensive city clothes utterly inadequate for the Siberian tundra. Eleanor, clutching her camel hair coat around her, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. Meredith, in her fashionable white linen, already shivering, her perfect blonde hair being whipped into a tangled mess. And Preston, his face a thundercloud of impotent rage, looking around for someone to sue, someone to fire, someone to blame. But there was no one. No smiling resort staff with welcome drinks. No courteous concierge. There was only Dmitri. A large, silent man with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, wearing a thick, greasy-looking sheepskin coat. He held a crooked, handwritten sign that said simply, "Sterling." I imagined Preston striding up to him, his voice booming with authority. "I am Preston Sterling. There has been a terrible mistake. We were supposed to be in St. Bart's. I need you to take us to a real hotel and contact the American embassy immediately." Dmitri would just stare at him with flat, gray eyes, grunt, and then wordlessly grab their carry-on bags, their only luggage for the next 3 days, and toss them into the back of a mud-splattered, Soviet-era UAZ van that looked more like a military transport vehicle than a taxi. The drive to the retreat would be the final nail in the coffin of their denial. A silent, bone-jarring journey through a bleak, monochromatic landscape of snow, rock, and the skeletal remains of trees. And then they would see it, rising from the tundra like a monument to despair, a series of interconnected, brutalist-style concrete buildings, stained with rust-colored streaks, surrounded by a sagging chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The sign, in faded red Cyrillic letters, would mean nothing to them. "Welcome to the Dixon Wilderness Retreat." The check-in process would consist of Dmitri pointing them toward a hallway. I pictured Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth as she saw her room, a small, damp, cinder-block cell with a narrow metal cot, a single bare light bulb, and a window that looked directly out onto the landfill. I pictured Meredith's high-pitched shriek when she discovered the communal bathroom at the end of the hall, with its perpetually dripping faucets, its mysterious stains, and its single, thin roll of toilet paper. And I pictured Preston, the master of the universe, finally realizing the totality of his powerlessness. He would discover his phone had no signal. He would be told the Wi-Fi was only available from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. He would be handed his traditional attire, a heavy, gray wool coat that smelled of mothballs and despair. And he would be served his first meal, a bowl of lukewarm, gelatinous fish soup. In that moment, he would know. He would know that his money was useless here. He would know that his name was meaningless. He would know that he had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and utterly, completely defeated. And he would know exactly who had done it. That image, that perfect, satisfying image in my head, it was better than any tropical beach. It was my own private paradise. Okay, everyone. I need to take a breath here. Just picturing that scene, imagining their faces as the reality of their situation crashed down on them, it was a lot. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of all the pain and betrayal. And I know it might sound cold, but it felt like justice. If you're still listening to me, if you followed me on this journey from that curbside at the airport to this moment of cold, sweet satisfaction, it means the world to me. If you get it, if you understand that feeling of being pushed too far and finally pushing back, please help me out. Like this video and just comment with the number 1 down below. That's it, just the number 1. It lets me know that you're here, that you're with me, and that my story is resonating with you. Your support is a bigger encouragement than you can possibly imagine. So please, comment with the number 1 and let me tell you what happened next. The next day, I flew to Denver. When I walked off the jet bridge, my sister, Chloe, was waiting for me. She didn't say a word. She just opened her arms, and I walked into them. She held me for a long time as people bustled past us, and for the first time in what felt like a decade, I felt safe. I stayed with her and her family for a week, sleeping in her cozy guest room. The movers arrived with my half of the life I'd left behind, the books, the art I'd collected, the clothes that were actually mine. We spent the days unpacking, and the nights sitting on her back porch, drinking wine and talking. I told her everything. Every humiliating comment from Eleanor, every locked door, every lie from Preston, every twisted detail of my parents' complicity. And finally, I told her about Siberia. She just listened, her expression shifting from horror to outrage to, finally, a slow, spreading grin. When I finished, she raised her glass. To the architect, she said. I'm so glad she's back. My new apartment felt cavernously empty at first. The silence was the loudest thing in it. For the first few nights, I'd wake up thinking I heard Preston's key in the lock. But slowly, the silence became peaceful. It was my silence. I bought a comfortable sofa in a deep shade of teal. I painted one wall a bright, sunny yellow. I filled the space with plants and music. I was building a life, not just furnishing an apartment. About 3 days after I moved in, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. The country code was for the Russian Federation. My heart gave a little lurch, but I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, the notification popped up. I took a deep breath and pressed play. It was Eleanor. Her voice was a ragged, desperate sob, stripped of all its icy authority. Audrey, please, you have to help us, she whimpered. The connection was terrible, full of static. It's a nightmare. It's a literal nightmare. The food. I can't eat it. It's freezing. Meredith has a fever, she won't stop crying. Preston, he just sits and stares at the wall. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, I'm begging you. Call someone. Get us out of here. I listened to the message twice. There was no apology in her words. Not really. It was the panicked plea of a cornered animal. She wasn't sorry for what she did, she was just sorry for the consequences. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a kind of profound detachment. She was just a pathetic old woman on the other side of the world. I deleted the voicemail. A day later, a text message came through from another strange number. Preston. His tone was different. No more threats. Just cold, desperate negotiation. Okay, you win. You made your point. I'll give you whatever you want in the divorce. The house, a bigger settlement, the retirement accounts. Anything. Just make the call and get us home. We can be civil about this. Civil, he still didn't get it. He thought this was about the divorce settlement, about money. He couldn't comprehend that it was about justice. It was about taking back the 8 years he had stolen from me. I typed one final reply. My lawyer will be in touch regarding the terms of our divorce. As for your travel arrangements, you are on a 2-week, non-refundable trip that you personally authorized. I suggest you find warmer socks. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. I blocked the number. And that was it. That was the last time I ever heard from any of them. They were no longer my problem. They were just voices from a void, echoes from a life that was no longer mine. They were a story I was finished telling myself. 2 weeks to the day after I was abandoned on that airport curb, my divorce from Preston was finalized. My lawyer, Catherine Black, lived up to her nickname. Faced with the threat of a public, scandalous court case involving incest and blatant financial manipulation, the Sterling family folded instantly. The settlement was, as Catherine put it, exceptionally generous. It wasn't about the money, but it was a quiet acknowledgement of the life and career I had sacrificed. It was restitution. On that very same day, I boarded another plane. This time, I wasn't filled with naive hope or cold fury. I was filled with a quiet, calm sense of purpose. I was on my way to Rome. My old company had been trying to recruit me for months to run their new global events division. The promotion came with a significant raise and the chance to live and work all over the world. I had always said no, because Preston had thought it was too much travel. Now, there was nothing holding me back. As the plane climbed to 30,000 feet, I looked out the window at the endless expanse of clouds below, a clean white slate. Somewhere down there, Preston, Eleanor, and Meredith were likely on their own long, miserable flight home. They were returning to a world that would be forever changed for them. News travels fast in those elite circles. They wouldn't be seen as powerful and strategic, they'd be seen as foolish and disgraced. Their carefully constructed legacy had been permanently tarnished by a 2-week stay in a Siberian hellhole. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about the apartment I would find near the Piazza Navona. I was thinking about learning to make pasta from scratch. I was thinking about the team I would build, the spectacular events I would create. I had packed a small sketchbook in my carry-on, and for the first time in years, it was filled with new designs, not for corporate logos, but for a line of dresses I'd always dreamed of making. The righteous anger that had fueled my revenge was fading, replaced by a strange lightness. The satisfaction I felt wasn't about their suffering anymore, it was about reclaiming my own power, my own story. They were no longer the main characters. They weren't even villains anymore. They were just a footnote in the prologue of my new life. I spent my first week in Rome in a haze of wonder, walking for miles, getting lost in the ancient streets. I found a small cafe in Trastevere that became my regular spot. One sunny afternoon, sitting there with my sketchbook and an espresso, I got a final email notification from my bank. The last of the settlement funds had been transferred. It was officially, completely over. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I just felt peace. I closed the notification without a second thought, took a sip of my coffee, and went back to my sketch. A woman who had been buried under years of lies had emerged, not just to survive, but to build a future that was unapologetically, gloriously her own. So, if you take anything away from my story, let it be this: sometimes, the end of the world is actually the beginning of a new one. The most powerful revenge isn't about destroying someone else's life, it's about building your own, on your own terms. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had a moment where you found your strength when you thought it was all gone, I would be honored to read about it in the comments below. Take care of yourselves. You are stronger than you know.